Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Chronic Fatigue and Burnout Recovery Podcast. Today, I wanted to talk about being an empath and experiencing chronic fatigue. And before I go into the episode, I thought I would just share a little bit about how the inspiration for this episode came about. Today's Monday, and yesterday I traveled to London for the day to see one of my friends. Her husband had organized a surprise brunch for her 40th birthday, and so I traveled down from the southwest coast to be there at the surprise brunch to surprise her for her birthday. Which, again, just as my own personal reflection, it just feels like just another great example of like ever expanding capacity in life, that I was able to just do something like that. Like for me, to get to London and back in a day, it's, 2.5+ hours of travel each way. I've got to drive to the station. I've got to get on a train for 2 hours. I've got to get, travel within London to get to the venue, do like a whole brunch in a busy restaurant for a couple of hours. Then I was actually, by the time we left the restaurant, it was about an hour until I knew I had to catch my train back. So I decided to walk to Clapham Junction, where I was getting my train from, through Wandsworth Common. So it was like an hour walk, and then get on a train. Got back to my home a couple of hours later, fed the cats, a very important job, and then had to go down to the beach to see the sea, because I hadn't seen the sea that morning before I left. Did an hour's walk on the beach, came home, woke up today feeling amazing. So in total, it was, I did at least two hours of focused walking, plus all the walking as part of the travel journey, the time in the restaurant with the background noise and the conversing, talking with some people that I didn't know, some people that I did know, eating different foods, probably having more sugar than what I would normally have. Yeah, just like a day like yesterday would have been unimaginable for me, 3 or 4 years ago, or if I had done it, there would have been so much stress leading up to the day. How is it going to be? Am I going to be able to do it? All those things that you worry about sometimes in advance of doing something new. And then I probably would have been really tired today. I probably would not have gone for a walk yesterday when I got back. So it's just really wonderful to like really reflect on that, and also just how I just feel great today. I just feel like my regular self. I did my functional patterns lesson, which I always do on a Monday morning. Then I had a little bit more time this morning, so I went down to the beach. I did a short swim. I've been doing some prep for new clients. I've been doing some emails for current clients. I just had lunch break. Now I'm recording this podcast and I feel clear. I feel great. And all is well in the world. So, and I'm not saying this to brag or boast, but just to really hopefully show a little bit of what is possible. And it doesn't happen overnight. What I managed to do yesterday and how I'm feeling today, has been something that I've worked for really consistently for a long time. And there was also a time when I thought I would never get here. And I am here now, and I'm here on this podcast telling you the story, even though I'm going on a little bit of a tangent of the topic. But I hope that will just maybe inspire you today to know that things can change and things can shift. And a big part of that is not necessarily doing things which are overly complicated, but just doing some of the simple things, but really being committed and being very consistent. So that was a big digression from the topic. But basically, when I was at this brunch yesterday, I was chatting to my friend whose birthday it was, and she said to me, do you think that there's any connection between being an empath and experiencing chronic fatigue? And so I said to her, yes, absolutely. I really do feel like there's a connection between being an empath, if that's the word you want to use, and chronic fatigue. Does that mean that everybody who identifies as an empath will experience chronic fatigue? No. Does that mean that everybody who experiences chronic fatigue is an empath? No as well. but there is a connection between someone who may identify as an empath and the experience of chronic fatigue. And that's what I would like to talk about in this episode is if you are someone who identifies as an empath and you are someone who thinks that that is something that's influencing your current experience of your energy, then I just want to talk about that and validate you and help you understand what you can do to support yourself. So first of all, let's talk about what is an empath. So an empath is a word I came across probably in about like 2017, 2018. During this time, I actually, through this friend who I went to go and see yesterday for her birthday, she introduced me to this Reiki practitioner, like psychic, medium, energy healer woman, and her name was Colleen. And I'd never done anything like this before. I was still kind of like dabbling in my spiritual side. And I did this virtual reading with her. And one of the things she said to me was like, you're an empath. You feel things very deeply. You take on the energy and emotions of others. You're very sensitive. Yeah, you might be very like empathetic and nurturing to other people. And this was the first that I'd ever heard this word empath before. But everything that this person said to me who didn't know me at all, it resonated very strongly with me. I now actually prefer to use the term highly sensitive. I find that it has perhaps maybe all of these words have actually got positive connotations and negative connotations, but my preference is to use the terminology highly sensitive. So for the rest of this episode, I'll probably just be alternating between the two, between using the word empath and between using the word highly sensitive. But the definition of an empath is someone who is highly sensitive to emotions of others, to the energy of others, to the feelings of others. And there is this idea that maybe somebody who's an empath may absorb the emotions of others. I don't really know what it means to absorb someone's emotions. If we're talking kind of more nervous system language, what I would potentially suggest here is somebody who is an empath or highly sensitive may be more likely to become dysregulated in the presence of someone else's emotional experience. So what that basically means is if you're with someone and they're really angry, you might not actually take on the anger. I'm just thinking of myself, but you might actually start to feel some dysregulation in response to the anger. Or if you're with someone and they're very low and sad, you might start to feel very low and sad yourself. But it might not necessarily be feeling the exact feeling that the individual is experiencing, but it might just be more that there's some sort of dysregulation which is happening in your system, which is in relation to the emotional experience of another. And that might be what is often referred to as absorbing energy or absorbing the emotions of other. It's a reference to the dysregulation we experience in our own system in response to another person. And I'm going to come back to why this matters in a moment. But then, I am someone who I do have quite a spiritual side to myself. My connection with my own spirituality and trust in life and the universe and just the ways of the world has really grown in a beautiful way through the work that I've done somatically and through the healing work that I've done on my own system. And I really do believe that there is a positive overlap between our ability to regulate ourselves and then our ability to trust in something that's bigger than us, whatever you want to call it. And for a period of time when I was really, really unwell, I felt very disconnected from that sort of sense of that there's something else, there's something bigger, and this sort of trust in life. And having it come back to me through my own healing journey has been something that has been really, really beautiful, and really helped to serve me so much in some of the things that have happened in my life since being unwell. So this is a bit of a tangent, but what I wanted to say here is, I do believe in magic. Let's call it magic. That's probably like the best way to describe it. And this idea of that there's an energetic component to all beings. And there may still be something to this taking on the energy of others, something that I probably don't fully understand, and maybe somebody who's more deeply rooted in the sort of spiritual realms, and that is more of their like day-to-day practice, what they're doing, what they're working with people, may have a better sense of being able to conceptualize that. But there may be an energetic component to this idea of absorbing the emotions of others. Then in terms of what an empath is, empaths are generally empathetic, as the name suggests, and they're can be quite nurturing and caretaking of others. They have a lot of compassion because they have a lot of empathy, as the name suggests. They might be very sensitive to the environment, so to noises, to sounds, to energy. A lot of people with chronic illness will be sensitive to environmental experiences, but it might not only be, oh, that light is very bright or that smell is very strong, but it might also be this sort of general sense of intuition, like I've got a bad feeling about this place, or I've got a really good feeling about this place. So it's not necessarily the sensitivity that we might think of as pathological, but it can also just be sensitive to the environment. And if we were using that kind of like a more sort of magical kind of idea of the energy of certain places and how certain places hold energy, an empath may be more sensitive to that. And then empaths may also need a lot of solitude, a lot of time alone to recharge their batteries. And I know that I am definitely one of those people. Like I love people. I love my friends. I definitely do not want to live a life of isolation and to be a loner by any means. I love having plans and doing things with people, but I need also to have a balance of enough space and alone time for myself. So that's kind of a definition of what an empath might be. And possibly if you're listening to this, you maybe already know you're an empath. That's why you're listening to the episode. But if you didn't know, maybe you're thinking, oh yeah, this also sounds a bit like me. So I said that I prefer to use the term highly sensitive. And it is suggested that 20% of the population is highly sensitive. And that's actually that's 1 in 5. The 1 in 5 people is highly sensitive. Although this idea of sensitivity isn't well understood, what I would like to do is to share some of my thoughts and feelings around this idea of sensitivity. Because I've often spoken with clients who see it as like something that's wrong with them, or something that they find is really hard as they navigate the world. And what I would say here as well is that at times I also do find my own sensitivity really challenging as I navigate the world, because the world is not set up in a way that is supportive for highly sensitive people. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. And there's sometimes I've really questioned myself and my sensitivity, but it's not a blanket experience for me. Actually, for the most part, I love my sensitivity. I see it as a gift. And one of the reasons I can approach it with a lot of positivity most of the time, not necessarily all of the time, is because I've learned to find regulation within my sensitivity. Because the worst combination is to be sensitive and dysregulated at the same time. And when we're highly sensitive and then we have a lot of dysregulation in our nervous system, probably coming from, childhood experiences and whatnot, then life can be particularly challenging. And I think that is then a predisposing factor to chronic illness. Not to say it's the only factor involved. There's multitudes of different factors, as you probably already know from listening to this podcast. So what I wanted to do a little bit was kind of like pick apart the definitions or the qualities of an empath that I've already discussed with you and talk a little bit more about it through the lens of the nervous system. So one of the things I mentioned before was this idea of like highly sensitive people, or empaths, are sensitive to the emotional energy and feelings of others, and this ability to absorb the emotions of others. And so if you were someone that grew up in a household that wasn't 100% or wasn't safe most of the time, shall we say, there's a certain amount of hypervigilance that we develop in our nervous system. If you had a parent who was inconsistent, if you had maybe someone in your family had explosive anger, for example, or maybe there was substance abuse in the household, or maybe you had a parent with a mental illness, or there was some sort of inconsistency within the family home, some people will develop to have a high degree of attunement in their system to the outside world. And what that means is we're kind of like on high alert. We're tuning into the energy of the environment around us so that we can stay ahead of the danger. You know, if you've got an inconsistent parent, the question for the child is, what's going to happen next? Is this going to be okay? Am I going to be safe? Is daddy going to get angry? You know, whatever it might be, there can be this hypervigilance in the nervous system. And so this can then develop into what looks like as the characteristic of being an empath, is we're highly sensitive to what's going on around us, because that's how our nervous system developed to keep us safe and protect us when we were a child. So this hypervigilance that we may experience in the system is sympathetic activation. And if you're constantly living in sympathetic activation, that's not going to be good for your health long term. So here now, weaving in the connections between being, and let's put it in air quotes, an empath and chronic fatigue is perhaps the reason why we would consider ourselves an empath, is because we have developed some of the traits of an empath through the need to survive because of the life that we experienced when we were developing our way of being in the world. Then the other thing is this idea of being especially like nurturing and empathetic towards others. And some of us have also learned to survive through things like people pleasing, through denying our own needs to make sure that everybody else's needs were met. And this is something that I've talked about previously, I think, when we talked about the different chronic fatigue personality traits. And if you are, again, in a household which is inconsistent or doesn't feel safe, and you learn to people please as a means of survival, you learn to be the caretaker as a means of survival, you learn to abandon your own needs and meet the needs of others as a means of survival, that can look like an empathetic personality trait. But it's understanding that some of these personality traits are perhaps dysfunctional. It's wonderful to be nurturing and to take care of others when we are regulated and when our own cup is full enough so that we can really give from this very abundant place. But that's not how most people are nurturing and caretaking. I know, because I'm one of those people that I've really had to learn. I've got a very strong nurturing and caretaking part. And what can manifest is that often in the past, I would need to make sure everyone is okay at the expense of my own needs. So in my business, when I'm managing a lot of clients, I really am mindful about not doing this. But in the past, before I was ill, if there was a client in distress, if a client needed something, I could not settle myself until I knew that that person was okay. And if that meant I had to work an extra hour, or I didn't get enough sleep, or whatever needed to happen, I would abandon my own boundaries and I would overwork to make sure that, a client's needs were met. But it would happen in personal relationships as well. Oh, so-and-so is going through a hard time. I should really see them, make time for them. But actually what I really want to do is just be at home and cuddle my cats for the weekend, or whatever it might be. So I'm not saying that being nurturing and caretaking is a bad thing, but what I am saying is when it becomes a default pattern or behavior that we are caretaking and nurturing others before our own cup is truly full, before we've learned to really nurture ourselves and set boundaries. And then we are in this really great, filled up, grounded place. And then from there, we can give. That's a very, very different way of that caretaking manifesting. And then I think the other thing that I touched on when we were talking about this idea of taking on the emotions of others, this was a very interesting thing. I was actually having a session with a client a while ago about this. This particular client had this caretaking archetype. And again, the tendency to sort of get swept away with the emotions of others and then needing to make sure that everybody else was okay before they could be okay. And as this person has been working on themselves and their nervous system, there was a noticeable shift in now I can just be grounded and I can listen and I can be this present support, but I don't have to get lost anymore in your distress. You can be distressed and I can be here for you without feeling distressed myself. And the only way we can do that is through being able to regulate our own nervous systems. That means in order to be with someone else's distress without getting distressed ourselves, or be with someone else's anger without getting dysregulated, or be with someone else's grief or sadness without getting pulled into it, we have to face our own grief and sadness. We have to face our own anger. That's usually one people want to avoid. We have to face our own distress. We have to work on our own system. And when we do that, someone else can be having their experience and we can be there for them, but we don't have to experience everything that they're experiencing to the same degree of intensity. That doesn't mean when a client sits in front of me and they're sad, I don't feel a little bit sad with them. But the sadness I feel isn't throwing my system completely out of balance. And so this is the lesson for somebody who is highly sensitive. My belief, and I hope that if you do identify as highly sensitive, you will take this on board, is that sensitivity is a beautiful gift. And very often we've become unwell because partly that sensitivity hasn't been sensitivity with regulation for all the reasons that I've just mentioned, essentially nervous system dysregulation, because the way that we learn to keep ourselves safe in the world has started to cause dysfunctional patterns in relation to other people as we've moved through life. Which means that we overgive, we abandon ourselves, we can't manage the distress of others without going into distress ourselves. And it feels like the weight of the world is on our shoulders because our emotional capacity is so small. But if we can grow our capacity through nervous system work and bring more capacity into the system and more grounding into our own system, then what we start to realize is that we can set boundaries, we can fill up our own cup, we can be with people and not have to take on everything that they're experiencing. And we can really honor our needs more without worrying about other people becoming abandoned or upset with us. And this is actually what really helps people to heal. A lot of the clients I've been working with at the moment are doing the functional medicine piece with me. I say piece because it's a piece of the puzzle. There's so many different aspects to it. But then a lot of the clients I'm working with, we're kind of like setting them up with a little bit of like a physical strategy that we're keeping an eye on. And then sort of every sort of monthly or bi-monthly, we're just doing somatic work. And these are the clients that I'm seeing are getting the best results because they're open to this idea that if their nervous system changes, the way that they're showing up in the world is going to change. that means that yes, we are supporting those physical pieces, whether it's molds or their gut or nutrient deficiencies or whatever else could be going on with them, dealing with MCAS and histamine and all of those wonderful things. But those people who are doing that and working somatically are really seeing some fantastic progress. It does take time with this work, depending on the amount of shutdown in the system. I've got clients who have been working with for quite some time, and yes, we are doing both the somatic and the functional medicine, but it is still slow because of where their nervous system is. But they are moving forward. If you're somebody who's feeling quite stuck and you haven't yet explored the nervous system side of things, you haven't yet explored the somatic side of things, is something I would really love to encourage you to do, especially if you identify as an empath and you feel like you're always getting swept away and derailed by your sensitivity or your empathy. Often, sometimes people might be stuck because they're like, oh, I need to work on my health, but I also need to look after my children and this and that, and everybody needs me. I'm getting pulled in all sorts of different directions and I can't seem to manage it all. I could talk with and I could coach with someone like that, and we could talk and talk and talk and talk, but they would never change, because the change has to happen in their nervous system. When the nervous system feels safe enough, then all of a sudden they can set the boundaries. They can say no, they can change the plan so that more of their needs get met. And that's where the real healing happens. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that hopefully you're understanding where some of this connection between the chronic fatigue and the empath archetype comes from. And just also reiterating here that I really believe that your sensitivity is a gift, and that through being able to regulate your sensitivity, that's where the healing is going to happen. In my own journey, I felt like, I was a sensitive child. I remember even from a young age, always crying a lot. And often, I remember always being told, oh, Anna's just tired. You're just overtired. As a child, I was always told I was tired, which sort of programmed me to this fatigue, maybe. Who knows? But now with the lens I have, I wasn't tired. I was just overwhelmed because my nervous system was overstimulated. And I know that my tendency when I'm overwhelmed and overstimulated is to cry. I think most children's tendencies when they're overstimulated and overwhelmed would be to cry. And I think even most adults' tendency when they're overwhelmed and overstimulated might just be to burst into tears. What a wonderful way to slow yourself down and regulate again. So that was my experience as a child, but I never had anybody who understood. I think I shared on a podcast recently, we lost my stepdad back in May. And at the time I had family in South Africa, and now my mom has come over here. She's working through some of the pieces she needs to work through over here in relation to his death. But even though she's lost her husband, and that's really sad for her, I felt like I was the most emotional. She came, and the first day I saw her, I was just in tears. I was really emotional about everything. And I said to her something through some tears, I'm the mushiest one in the family, something like that, or the soppiest one in the family. And she was like, yes, Shiloh, which is my sister's name, she said, yes, Shiloh is a lot more like me. And my dad is also a lot more like them. What I'm sharing with this little anecdote is that I'm probably I was the sensitive child in a family where the other people are just not as sensitive. And therefore, how could they understand my sensitivity? And how could they model or empower? How could they be role models for empowering me in my sensitivity? Because they had no concept that that was even a thing. And so many of us who grew up highly sensitive didn't have someone say, wow, your sensitivity is so great. This is how we can channel that sensitivity in a way that empowers you. And this is what you need to do to look after yourself so that you can stay in regulation with your sensitivity. Like, who would have had that experience as a child? Probably very few people, if any people. So we've grown up in a world which is not designed for us. If 20% of the population is highly sensitive, the population is designed for 80% of the world, not us 20. And something I probably still actually berate myself a little bit more for is my need for space and my need for rest. Because what I'm finding now is because I didn't have that empowerment of my sensitivity and learn to regulate through my sensitivity as a child, what I learned instead was to shut down, was to go numb, was to dissociate. And, I didn't really know what I was feeling. I remember thinking, I'm not an anxious person, because not that I wasn't anxious or didn't get anxious or fearful about things, but I just had no connection to my anxiety. I would have been the person who said, I never get angry. Sometimes I get disappointed, but I never get angry, because I was so shut down and disconnected from my anger. I experienced a lot of sadness because I guess it had to come out somewhere, and hence the crying. But again, it also wasn't sadness really held in beautiful regulation, but just the sort of like sadness that spills over and leaves you exhausted, but never helps your system to reorganize. I've forgotten where I was going with this. I remember now. So, I was very sensitive, but I managed my sensitivity through just shutting down. And that was a great because it helped me push through all the time. It helped me achieve lots of things, helped me meet the needs of others and abandon myself. And it got me pretty far in life to a degree until it didn't anymore, until I got sick. And I'm not saying that that's the only reason why I was sick, because I know there are other things too, like, all the other physiological components I've had to work on as well. But this is definitely a big piece of the puzzle. And from learning to come back into regulation, I now feel like I'm more sensitive than I've ever been, because now I can feel that little teeny tiny bit of anxiety. Now I can feel the anger. Now I can feel the sadness. But the difference is I know how to regulate through it. So I am sensitive, but because I'm sensitive and I can regulate, I can now use that sensitivity to help me really meet my needs. And as I'm experiencing and as I'm attuning and as I'm responding to this heightened degree of sensitivity, it means the life that I used to live before is no longer possible now, because that life was a life that was lived by somebody who was numbing and shutting down to get through the day. Whereas this life is being lived by someone who is centered and grounded and connected and regulated and really in tune with what she needs moment to moment. Not to say that I get it right all the time, but because I'm in tune, I can't just do the things I used to do anymore, because that's not good for me and I feel it. And this is where I do grapple a little bit with myself. There's still some shoulds, which are a hangover from past life. Like, I should be able to do more. I should be able to see more clients. I should be able to do X, Y, or Z. I'm sure you all have your shoulds. And for a while, I used to think of that means like, that probably means I'm not healed yet. I haven't done enough. Not recovered enough yet, or whatever the story might be. And therefore I'm not good enough, or, whatever the story might be. What I'm coming to arrive at more and more is that no, like that's just not how things are supposed to be. Because when you stay in attunement with yourself, when you honor yourself, when you meet your needs, you feel good. So why should there be anything wrong with you doing what you need to do to feel good and thrive? but arriving at that place has come off the back of loads and loads of work and personal growth. And sometimes it's been pretty horrible going down some of the rabbit holes that I've needed to go down in order to get to this place. And I know that there will be more really challenging rabbit holes to go down and grow through to get to the place I'm going to be at in 6 months' time or a year's time or 2 years' time or whatever. And that can feel really lonely at times as well, when you feel like, there's people who just get up, go to work, parent their children, have really busy weekends, and don't ever seem to like really get to feel too much of anything. And, there are some people who can just get on with life and never have too many ups and downs. If you're sensitive, you will feel more of the ups and downs of life, and things can feel really hard and tricky, especially if you're digging into more of the healing work. But yeah, the most important thing is that you have the right support and you can regulate yourself through the journey, and also just appreciate that it's a double-sided coin. So there's contraction and expansion, and when things feel really contracted and hard, that's usually going to create an opening for more expansion on the back end. So that's at least what I like to remind myself when I'm going through like a tricky patch in emotional healing, is like, okay, this feels really hard and sticky and yucky right now, but I know if I can just stay with it and move through this, there will be something more beautiful on the other side. And that's what you, as the highly sensitive, gets to experience. You get to experience more of the beauty of life, as well as more of the challenges as well, unfortunately. So I hope that has been helpful in terms of kind of really practical advice, in terms of like, if you are someone with chronic fatigue and you are identifying that your sensitivity or your empathy is something that is impacting your journey, very, very bluntly put, nervous system work is where it's at. You may know or not know by this point in time that I have a membership subscription, which you're welcome to join. It's called Nurturing Resilience. In Nurturing Resilience, we have 5 courses, which I call the foundational 5. These are the things that I feel are going to be the most important foundations for fatigue recovery. One of those foundational 5 pillars is the nervous system. And there is a course in there which will help you with so many of the things that I've spoken about today, just learning how to regulate more, come more into yourself, attune with yourself, and work through all the different layers of nervous system regulation so that you can build your capacity. And, for some people, the nervous system work is most of the work, but not for everyone. And therefore, you can also, when you join the membership, have access to the other foundational 5 pillars. And we talk about blood sugar and sleep and pacing and managing inflammation in the body. And then there's some additional trainings on things like digestive health and detoxification and oxygenation and yoga and breathing and all of those things. So if that is something that is of interest to you, if you haven't found your way yet with the nervous system, I'd highly recommend that. It's on my website. You can just go to animash.co.uk and then click on the membership tab. So that feels like a good place to wrap up this episode. If you are someone who identifies as an empath or highly sensitive, and you have found this really helpful to listen to, I would love it if you could leave a review. The reviews just help to improve the podcast ratings, and it means other people can find this work that I'm creating. If you want to take it one step further, you could also share this episode for maybe someone else you know who's highly sensitive or an empath or struggling in their fatigue journey and maybe needs the insights from this episode today. It has been wonderful speaking with you all, and I will see you very soon in the next episode.